to your discretion on how you want to put that call out into the world. In order to actually do a procurement, you oftentimes will do something called a request for proposals, but there are other ways that you can do kind of procurement processes that you'll hear a lot of terminology like REOI, request for expression of interest, or you can direct award it if you don't want to do a competitive process, if you know exactly who you want to work with and how you want to work with them. During a competitive procurement process, though, what you would usually do is you will receive all the responses back from any interested parties in your procurement process, and you will review and or interview them to narrow it down to the most serious candidates and the ones that you want to work with the most closely. And eventually, you're going to award that contract to the winner of the procurement process. When you're creating a list, there are a number of different ways that you can go about creating that list. The first one, as I mentioned, is a public call, or it could be a closed call. A closed call is when you go to a very specific group of people and you really only want those potential consultants responding to your RFP. A public call is one where you post it publicly and anybody can respond at any point in time. Other ways that you can make sure that you're getting the right people to respond is word of mouth. You can talk to other people in your sector, in your networks, to see who they've worked with, what their experiences working with those consultants has been, making sure you're getting the right people to join you. There is a prefab navigator database that is available, and Brandon, to put you on the spot, you were the one who mentioned this, so it might be possible to share that link in the chat. But you can specifically look for groups that are available in your area using that navigator and going to them directly to see if they can respond to your RFP. Use your past experience if you've done processes before. Make sure that you are inviting the people you work well with to see if they're interested in responding, and then research. You can do some Googling, talk to other people. As I mentioned, there's a lot of different terminology when you're talking about procurement. REOI, request for expression of interest. It's usually it comes as a step before a full RFP process. You're trying to gauge who might be interested in responding to your project, gather some more information, maybe to help out with defining that scope of work that you want them to respond to. A full request for proposals will indicate that you actually are looking for a contract at the end of that process. A request for a quote, you're mostly looking for a fee as opposed to a full response for a full proposal as a response. Or as I mentioned before, you can do a direct award. You know who you want to work with, how you want to work with them. When you're putting out a request for proposal, some information that you want to make sure to share with the groups that you are asking to respond to it is your company and the background of your project. Provide any information that you already know that will make sure that their proposals actually meet your expectations. You need to be very clear about the timeline of that proposal, how long it will be open for, and when they have to send their responses by. If you have a budget for that project, it's oftentimes useful to include that so that you are making sure that your proposals are coming in around what you're expecting or what you can afford to spend on it. You want to define the project scope, and if there's a specific contract type that is going to be useful for your project, you're going to identify any concerns that your project might have or difficulties that might need to be highlighted. And then you might also want to put out your evaluation criteria. What are the things that are most important to you to make sure that they are addressed in the proposal responses? As you're going through your request for proposals process, you're going to want to make sure you're tracking any interested parties. Oftentimes when you send out an RFP, consultants will respond to you right away and say, yes, we're intending to respond to this RFP. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. And so you're going to want to start making a list of all the groups that have reached out to you over the course of your RFP timeline. And then that way, as people send you any questions. They may have questions to better understand what type of response you're looking for, clarifying questions about the information you provided about the project. You can also start tracking those. It's really important that if people are asking you questions as part of your RFP process, that you're sharing that information with everybody who is interested in the RF in responding to the RFP, which is why we start tracking those interested parties from the get-go. And eventually, if there's a big change or if one of the questions made you realize that there was a mistake in your RFP, you might want to include an official amendment to that RFP and make sure again to share it with all the interested parties and post it publicly if it's a open call RFP process. So that's a really preliminary introduction to RFP processes. And I'm going to hand it over to Brandon now to talk a little bit more specifically about how those processes might be influenced by using a modern method of construction.
Perfect. Thanks, Paige. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So just quickly for folks who weren't there last week, or yeah, just joining this week. Brandon Searle, I'm Director of Innovation and Operations at the Offsite Construction Research Center, which we're located at University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, New Brunswick. So last week we talked about the MMC definition category. So again, this was a framework that we developed and kind of looking at other countries and identifying, okay, this is needed for policy, procurement, and so on. And so today, when we're talking about procurement, I'm really going to focus on the first two categories, which are volumetric modular construction, boxes, or what a lot of people would refer to as modular, and panelized structural systems, which that, from my perspective, includes light wood frame, light gauge steel, precast concrete, and mass timber. And then just a reminder of what's enclosed in those. So category one is, structural module only, the module with interior fit out, a fully enclosed module, or a turnkey module with service pods. And then category two is structural framing panels, insulated panel systems, a fully integrated panel, so completely closed. I'll say open and closed panels quite a bit, or externally finished panels. And so just when I'm going through, procurement processes do change a little bit and can be impacted depending on how much at what level of MMC you want to use or what percentage of it is built in a factory. Last week, I introduced this definition of modern methods of construction or an offsite construction integrator. I'm not, our experts, the Q&A experts or case study presenter later may or may not talk to this. But again, it's just a reminder that integrator it can be a general contractor, it can be part of the design team, it could be a new entity that's part of the project team, or sometimes the manufacturer, and they have expertise in leveraging modular or prefab methods in a project, and they get involved right from the get-go, often the relationships like owner to the integrator. And then again, Canadian MMC manufacturers, any entity that performs the manufacturing activities within Canada, regardless of whether it is a subsidiary or a foreign company, et cetera, et cetera. Just mentioning those in case you wanted to use those yourself. Those definitions are direct from Natural Resources Canada. It's a new offsite construction challenge program that they launched a couple weeks ago. And so you can use that in that RFP or challenge program that they put out. And so when thinking about the MMC integrator, I'll admit I use generative AI to produce this graph. Briefly, I just wanted a simplified version to show this, but take it as a conceptual figure. But essentially, what it is you can go from an open panel system, which is often like say about 20 to 25% of your building ends up being built off site, let's say, in terms of project value or building costs, right up to like 90% complete when you go to full volumetric modular. And this is based on experience that we've had and with our industry partners is as the, as there's more project scope done in a factory, the importance of that MMC integrator seems to increase. I don't know if it's linear or exponential, but I asked for an exponential curve today, so that's what we ended up with. But it's just really important to mention that. And then beyond that, the role of the MMC manufacturer, and I want to mention that this can is both project and company specific. I've worked with some companies who historically do a lot of single family homes, but they've done a full hotel, and they manage the whole project. Whereas I've worked with others who they'll tell me they prefer to only focus on the scope of work that's in the factory. They like they like the civil work to be dealt with by the general contractor and the fit out and installation and shipping and storage and everything else to be dealt by someone else. We like to focus on what's in a factory. So it does vary a bit. But in general, we kind of view it as four different roles. So they could be the prime or GC, where they do their that first one I mentioned. So design assist, civil, responsible for manufacturing, delivery to site, install, fit out, handover, everything. They could be the subcontractor, again, design assist, manufacturing, and delivery and site, installation and fit out. They could be the subcontractor that does design assist manufacturing and delivery to site, or the last one, which is the one that we've seen to be the most successful when you get into the MERB projects, is they're involved in design assist and manufacturing. I put in bold, should be bold on all four bullets, but I put in bold the design assist piece. When thinking about how you're procuring modern methods of construction project, particularly volumetric modular, it's vital to have that manufacturer involved in the design phase, which does influence how you procure. Um, yeah, I kind of am repeating myself here, but regardless of the project, design assist is key to leverage all the benefits that modern methods promises. Uh, we've seen in like open panels and other panelized systems where, yeah, there's no problem, for them to bid on a framing scope of work or whatever it might be, whether or not it had been designed for panelization, but you're not optimizing it to its full potential and optimizing industrialized construction to its full potential. Uh, I what we've seen is particularly on projects kind of larger than 8 units, and again, it is company specific, but each group in the value chain should be responsible for what they do best. So again, we've worked as a research center with over 25 manufacturers across the country, and the majority say if we had an order book and we could stick to being responsible for what's in the factory, we can maximize our potential and benefit to the sector. And so many prefer to have an integrator, design team, and a general contractor that already has expertise in this, and leave that to leave all the site work to them. And then if it is a multi-unit residential building, I've heard of varying opinions on this, but in general, I've often heard if it's like above, say, like 8 units, involving a general contractor who has local trade relationships, expertise working with the authority having jurisdiction, and so on and so forth, and doing all that site prep and installation and fit out is quite important there. Um, so now I'm just going to talk on the three different models quickly, and I'm going to talk through design bid build because it's what I think the majority is aware of. Design build because you often hear that that's the best one to leverage MMC, and then IPD because it's been a hot topic for a while, and I think it's not going away anytime soon. So just in the project delivery model, when it's a design bid build, not much really changes. But again, finding an avenue to engage the MMC manufacturer for design assists, or have that GC act as an integrator is important. Obviously, that's difficult to do when you procure your design first and so on. But an experience that we had here with a project was it wasn't a housing project. It was a project on campus, and it ended up going mass timber. And I'm mindful of time, so I can't, not much time for stories, but essentially they procured the design team, designed it all. They went off what was known, publicly in the going according to code and the design catalog and so on. But then after they procured the construction manager, who then procured the mass timber supplier, they realized all those mass timber companies had their own calcs internally and had their own kind of engineered solutions and so on. So it led to a lot of redesign. Ended up being a really good project, and I understand the university was very happy with mass timber and prefab, but they weren't able to leverage the complete benefit by having that um, MMC manufacturer involved at the beginning of design. So ways to do that is really in a design build. So in this case, you would bring the design team, the GC, and the MMC manufacturer into a DB team, and you'd procure for that. There should be a line from owner to DB team. Sorry, sorry about that. No one would have noticed if I didn't point it out. But anyways, and the other piece that we like to add, and there's a project here in Charlottetown that I have a picture of later, where they involved the MMC integrator because they had a local general contractor, uh, regional manufacturer, a local architect and engineering team involved, but none of them had as much expertise with doing a 6-story modular building. So they brought in an MMC integrator who's educating the general contractor, has a super and PM on site, educating the owner, and involved in the manufacturing process. So some advantages and challenges with DBV. Obviously, it's the most widely recognized. It's a bit prescriptive design intended to promote apples to apples pricing, which is beneficial, I think, as an owner or in Pages. If I was putting on Pages hat, that would be beneficial, I would think. Declared cost of construction and clean rolls for each party. One thing on that second bullet, prescriptive design, I was often told that if you design for traditional construction, or sorry, if you design for modular, you can still build traditionally, but if you design for traditional conventional construction, it's expensive to convert it to a modular design or a closed panel integrated design. So keep that in mind. Some challenges, again, if the MMC manufacturer is excluded from any design development discussions, you won't leverage the real benefits. Longer linear duration and schedule, reduced communication between design and construction, often results in more extras. A lot of research that demonstrates that. And then prescriptive design does not allow innovation or as much innovation in alternative proposals. From a design build side, the owner contracts directly with the design builder. The architect is contracted by the DB. Integrated design with the MMC builder. Suitable for fast track with immediate feedback and team collaboration throughout. Challenges, which I really want to emphasize, and Paige has educated me on as well. The proponent must invest significant time and resources during the design phase, and it's not aligned with many programs for affordable housing development. If you're curious what that means in bold, you can ask Paige. Um, Owner must state a maximum ceiling price, or things can get a bit out of hand. And owners share the design approval responsibility with the DB team, which pushes up more responsibility onto the owner at times. Um, the last one too, which Paige kind of touched on, I believe, is procurement policies. There's often programs that nonprofits, housing providers leverage, have their own procurement policies. Municipalities do, federal programs do, and so on. And plus, there's internal ones. So sometimes that becomes a challenge to use DB. Lastly, I'm just going to go through it really quickly, but IPDs being talked about, particularly in the hospitality, sorry, in the institutional, so schools sector in particular, a little bit in the commercial space as well. And what I've been told is that this is what will often produce the best um, project, uh, but it's not necessarily the best value for money. So you'll get the best product, but you'll also likely spend the most. And so in this case, though, again, you'd have the MMC integrator, the design team, the GC, the MMC manufacturer, as well as the key subs involved throughout. Some challenges, a lot of the advantages are a bit similar to DB, but challenges, again, not aligned with many programs. There's a lot of trust required, particularly among the IPD team. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and must set a max price as well. A few other project delivery models that we mentioned. So obviously there's cost plus, construction management and construction management at risk. CCDC 5B is what the project was that I referenced on campus here at Leverage Mass Timber. And again, to leverage the benefits of MMC, the most effective is when the contract model allows for design innovation, collaboration, and incentivizes time savings. So that's really key when you're looking at this and going a bit beyond a lowest bid wins approach in your design. This one might be a bit too detail, but first off, that project is one of two six-story projects in Charlottetown, PEI. So that's the one I mentioned. It was a design build project where you have an MMC integrator and the full team that was kind of listed. And I can share more about that project if folks are interested. Um, it's I think I mentioned this, but DB is the optimal choice because if you're not involved in design assist, converting from conventional to MMC is very difficult, and we've seen it across the country recently with a large developer in the GTA who converted from a, a traditional ready mix concrete to a precast solution. Um, DB allows you to engage the MMC manufacturer early. Design considerations need to be met, particularly around structural, architectural, mechanical, and electrical and the plumbing system. So I don't want to go into the weeds too much, but if folks are familiar with clash detection, it becomes very important and early on before you start manufacturing. All that needs to be dealt with. And then it allows for concise and early design decisions and approval. So I think I mentioned this last week. Uh, Having design complete is vital to before you start manufacturing because again, once you start, like you could have there's a 16 unit apartment that it took like less than 2 weeks for all those mods to be built in the factory and delivered to site. One thing that Craig Mitchell, who's our Q&A expert, next week, he always preaches go slow to go fast. He means go slow in the pre-construction to be able to go fast during construction. So he'll probably speak to that next week a bit. Few other considerations when looking at the contract for DB and when leveraging MMC. So payment terms are key. Um, and particularly I've seen them more in volumetric and maybe some of our Q&A experts can speak to this, but they seem to vary, but oftentimes require a down payment early on. And then there's different progress claims that isn't tied to necessarily site progression, but might be tied to completion in the factory. Change orders after design become a problem because they're much more costly when you have everything already done and manufactured that much quicker. Progress and milestone draws. So again, that's tied to your payment terms. Delivery to site. So sorting out who's responsible for that and who gets paid at what time can be tricky, especially if the manufacturer isn't responsible for the civil site, but they aren't getting paid until the module arrives to the site. Transportation, storage, and logistics. I've heard of that becoming issues on a variety of projects where environmental factors, whether it's too windy, so you can't leverage the crane or whatever it might be. So that's something to talk about. Maybe Marta can speak to that later. Then a payment certifier. So and again, our Q&A experts could probably speak to this better than me, but I've seen the MMC kind of integrator act as that owner's represented payment certifier. So they'll have someone located close to the factory who is in there monitoring progress, and that will then kind of track how far along it is and when to release payment for the modules. So some key takeaways is just type of project delivery and contract is dependent on geography and project type. There's no one size fits all. Here in New Brunswick and Quebec and so on, I know volumetric modular industry is quite mature. In BC, obviously, mass timbers mature, and so it's some specific to your region. An RFI or RFQ is a good starting point. I've heard of some architecture firms actually doing this and creating their own internal database, almost like this prefab navigator. I'd love to see BCH out of this RFI that they announce create a database that all the industry can use with some kind of details on who does what well. the GC manufacturer and MMC integrator need to have the role as the integrator. So go back to that definition and figure out who's best to do that. Less important in my opinion with Panelize, but talking with that Panelized manufacturer, they might be able to educate you on that process. Involve the MMC manufacturer in the design stage. DB presents the best opportunity to leverage the benefits. That's around speed, cost certainty and predictability, safety, and sustainability. And obviously, those key challenges need to be addressed. And then finally, ensure you resolve those contract challenges for design and payment milestones early so that you can leverage it as much as possible. So with that, I'm 4 minutes over time. I'm going to wrap up and hand it back to Paige to run the Q&A with Martin and Nicholas.
Thank you so much. So just a reminder to everybody, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to moderate the questions that are being presented to our two guest experts who are joining us. So at this point, I would like to welcome Nicholas and Martin from Ellis Don Community Builders and Maison Bonneville, respectively, to join us. And I'm going to ask both of you to give us a quick understanding of who you are, who do you work for, what is your job, and why you're here today.
I'll let Nicholas start.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Paige. My name is Nick Fuchsia. I am Senior Vice President of Affordable Housing with Ellis Don, and I lead a team called Ellis Don Community Builders. We're actually on the capital side of Ellis Don, so on the development management arm. We're about 7 years old. We came from used to be a general infrastructure group, and our group was primarily responsible for delivering healthcare assets across Canada. We restructured to focus a few of us on affordable housing, and that's we started with 2019. Our day-to-day business development managers for nonprofit organizations, municipalities, and Indigenous groups across Canada. We're also in the far north, and we also are larger scale affordable housing developers when the project requires that. So we do provide development equity and lead projects, and we're very interested in the Build Canada Homes program. Very grateful to be here today. I'll pass it off to Martin.
Thank you, Nicholas. Hi, folks. I'm here. I represent Bonneville. Bonneville is a 65-year-old modular manufacturer. So this year is our 65-year. I guess we were modern before modern methods of construction existed. We started with modules. The first thing we sold were actual models. 2 years ago, we pivoted our business model, which was mainly oriented toward housing, single dwelling using housing and cottages. And we directed it toward 80% of every square foot that comes out of our plant is directed to multi-residential, and all of it is non-market so far. So in the last 18 months, we've installed over 750 units of non-market units. So this is what we've been doing. We've been spending a lot of time in trying to find the best way to bring it to the people, to find a way to integrate. So it's great. Like I love what I heard from Brandon. It's a lot of things that we've come across and that we've realized. So we're looking forward to answer your questions, guys.
All right, and we have some questions coming in. So the first question is, it seems MMC requires a greater proportion of payment upfront compared to traditional construction. Other than doing due diligence investigating companies at the start, do you have any advice on how to mitigate the risk of a manufacturer or contractor walking away or going out of business? So is there a way to mitigate risks, particularly with a larger upfront capital commitment?
I can go on that one. I think it's important to do the due diligence. I think it really depends. We operate mostly on the Quebec side, where the actual financing of project goes through a crown corporation, which is the SHQ. They have a program which we haven't built a single unit in because they actually managed to slow it down, but we have projects in it, but they're took a year and a half to develop. As for other projects, we went quickly. I think it's important. I think CMHC is starting to roll out a program. They have a pilot program how to ensure progressive payment if the manufacturer is bounded. But I think it's important to it's there's a big risk with new shops coming in because the actual capital there's a lot of capital needed to build the actual units. But before you actually start building units, there's a very expensive capital load that has to be done. So we have the advantage of having been there 65 years, so we're there. But there's other solid groups in Quebec and in Ontario and New Brunswick that have experience. So I think the way to mitigate risk is to make sure that what the schedule is for the manufacturer and what is their capacity and what volume are you looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take a bit on that. So just following the presentation, which was extremely helpful, and I agreed in most part. I think we're one of the biggest general contractors in Canada, and we really like the design build model. But I think what's very important is to understand where you are in the development timeline. So if you're in the pre-development stage, that means you possibly could be looking at entitlements approvals at the municipal level, which could entail some significant redesign or some design that you actually have to explore before you can move down a certain path. We build for nonprofit organizations, so there's a high consideration for the programmatic requirements of the build. And I think during that pre-development phase, you really want to get those two things solidified before you start looking for the construction solution. So there's a balance here, really. You don't want to be too committal to engaging too early on an MMC or a traditional construction solution for that matter until you get some design parameters in place. But knowing that if you're going to go the MMC route, to make sure that you understand what's available locally in the market. And in terms of construction solutions, before we go into pre-con, we look at things from a total capital cost view. So you're looking at, and those three pillars, right? It's hard costs, soft costs, and financing costs. And that's really the diligence that you want to run at that point. The materials, the commodities, and the labor for hard costs, soft costs, what does it take to get from idea to a workable design? And then financing costs, to answer the question directly, it does go into the analysis, is if there's a 30% deposit required to claim your spot on a production line, is that within that full analysis the best construction solution to meet the design that you need to move forward with? That's the type of analysis we would run. And that's typically done in the pre-development phase before we get to pre-construction. And I think if you kind of look at where you are temporarily on that pre-development versus pre-con timeline, that's the type of analysis that we would run with our clients.
Thank you. And I think it was a very good question because I think we all want to jump in on this one. So I'm going to throw it over to Brandon too.
Well, I was gonna go. I have some. I have an opinion, but I'm gonna go back to Nick with the question. Nick, a lot of times I get asked if there's specific cost consultants, insurance companies, anyone specific that has more expertise in this MMC space, whether it's volumetric modular or closed panels or whatever it might be. Do you guys work with anyone specific that has more expertise in that area? And I will say in general, the upfront financing insurance piece, based on what I've seen, it seems to be the biggest barrier to leveraging MMC, just because of how systems are already in place.
Yeah, I mean, I don't on these panels, I don't love name specific companies, but there are national providers that have a great database of local costing, whether it's through hard, soft, and then we usually bring a little bit more table on the financing side just because of the space that we occupy in the social infrastructure side. But certainly, you really are driving at a Class B budget. Because that's what creates your threshold for the eligibility of financing, and that's what you want to drive to as soon as possible. And if you can get that vetted by a trusted quantity surveyor, that's your best bet, because I know it's tough to look at apples versus oranges at a specific design period, but you really want to look at what's available in your local market across the board to see what your construction solution would be. So I would certainly say if you have a GC that is conducting some sort of pre-development activity, giving you a price, you do want to shadow price that to see that you're as a check and balance. But I would say also, though, in that activity is that at the end of the day, you do want to create a competitive tension. You want to make sure you can get a cost consultant to say that this is the orbit in which we would see a reasonable construction price. But at the end of the day, you do want to get some bids. You want to see what the actual construction pricing would be from your proponents who are interested in building that project. And then it's a consideration of timing and the delivery model that you're going to be pursuing. Does that hopefully that answers part of your question, at least.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions coming in. One is, if you're going the route of using a CCDC2 or a 5B construction contract, when should the MMC integrator be procured? After the design team and the CM have been procured, before, at the same time? And is there an estimated cost of what should be held in a budget for that role? A certain percentage of the total project cost as you usually do for the design team. And obviously understanding that this will probably vary depending on the size of the project and the location.
Well, if I speak on Bonneville part, we like to be integrated as soon as possible because the approach we brought, the way Bonneville works is that we focused in the last 2 years, we focused a lot starting by assembling units. You know, a unit will be a bathroom, a bedroom, a kitchen. We've assembled that. Then we said, what would be the typical model? Our typical module will do 16 feet wide, 68 feet long. So what is the best typical modules we can do depending on the type of topologies? And then we assemble these together. So if we believe we need to be involved as soon as possible in the design process to get the best of what our system offers. I think if the architects have experience with modular construction, we can come later, the architects and the engineer, but we have focused a lot, like Nicholas brought up, you know, total cost construction is soft cost plus hard cost plus financing cost. What we have done at Bonneville, we realize if we only focus on the hard costs of the projects, you're not going to get the best advantage of modular construction. So you need to have a fabricator or a company that understands the whole cycle. Okay? So we can't cheap out. One of the things we hate is I can't. People will say, "Oh, can I put cheaper windows or cheaper insulation?" Or cheaper mechanical system. And I'm like, no, your CapEx will be a little higher, but your OpEx will, you know, in 15 years, you're going to regret those choices. So we're not going to, we don't go in those type of projects, you know, because often if it's only price driven, if you're only trying to get the advantage of price driven for construction, you're not going to get the best of it. So the earlier we're integrated in the process, the better it is. But we also understand that we work in an environment where the stakeholders is not only the fabricator, there's the architect, there's the engineers, there's BCH, there's the SHQ, there's a lot of stakeholders. So we got to know what our role is. So we have decided to have on our team, we have engineers on our team, architects on our team, but we don't do the full design. That's why we need to work in the environment. So the faster we're involved, the less retrofit you'll have to do on plans. And it's Brandon who said you can take you can't retrofit a plan. If the plan wasn't done modular, we don't even look at those anymore. We don't even entertain that. We're getting so busy that there's no added value for us to redo plans. We will do it if a project, for example, had funding and was going to lose its funding, its government funding. We'll say, okay, well, if you're willing to throw out your plans and all the soft costs that you've already put in it, or part of it, we can get involved. But the faster, the better, I believe, as long as you trust who you're working with. So there's a few systems that we've seen, but it's a hard question because it's hard to pick, and it's especially when you're in a non-market environment with different procurement systems, it can get really tricky to get them involved at the beginning.
Yeah. So maybe just as a follow-up to that then, what information, when someone's coming to you with a project, what information should they be coming to you with? Like, should they have at least a concept in mind?
Usually, when we sit with a client or potential client or groups, uh, the basic questions. First of all, do you have land? Say, where's your land? What are you looking for? What clientele are you trying to service? Are you looking for transitional housing? Are you looking for more, standard non-market? The depth of affordability now with CMHC that has a bit of a factor, so we'll have, we'll look into that. Then we'll ask how many units. Often people come with a unit in mind. They'll come with a unit mix. So these are the basic information. We'll also ask them, what's your experience in modular construction? Have you used it before? Yes. Did it go well? Did it not go well? What didn't work out? What worked out? So, we'll try to get as much information on that side to see, where can we provide value? Um, that's the basic question is pretty much, where, when, how many, and where's the funding coming from? Like, do you have funding or not? If you don't have funding, what is the plan? It varies. In Quebec, there's various routes that you can go for funding. So that's what we're trying to work out with
Brilliant.
information, basic information.
Thank you
I
so
got a
much. And I'll throw
couple
the
there
question
too.
to you, Nick, if that's all right.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I agree with everything that Martin said, but it also depends on the timeline. So if a client comes to us and that they have a concept that's the land is not necessarily zoned for or entitled at the moment, that's gonna add a work stream to them. And we always have to consider site as well. So I mean, site remediation issues, if we're building on greenfield versus brownfield versus grayfield, all that development profile is something that you need to take into consideration and map out the pre-development period before even getting into construction solutions. But the nice thing is that it gives you time to do that. Some of our most most expedited modular projects, we were able to deliver 3 rapid housing initiative projects within 12 months. But what didn't get identified is that there was about 4 to 5 years of pre-development activity to be able to meet the tight timelines of the RHI program of that time, right? So there is the development period plus the construction period that really you have to integrate in terms of your full development plan from early concept to construction completion.
Can I just quickly jump in there? Paige, you shared last week, because what Nick just said was really important too. Nick, last week when we presented like stuff at a 101 level, we showed kind of a traditional project schedule and it was just blocks. It obviously didn't show the intricacies of each one, but that pre-development, we tried to highlight like how that really is not changing because you decide to use modular over traditional. And that's where I think the project you're referring to, I think I'm aware of as well, where I think the owner might have assumed, you know, we hear it so much faster, so we can put this project timeline, but it doesn't change much in pre-development. It's really after all that's decided that you can crunch that project schedule a bit.
That's right. And I'll add just one more layer to that as well is that what really drives schedule a lot of the times in Canada, we've seen this since 2018, is that a program will be announced and we have a new government incentive to build in a certain way, which has been modular. And that really does accelerate a lot of the timelines, but that's not necessarily the natural flow of pre-development into pre-con that you would see in other asset classes. And that creates a whole kind of different dynamic that we're living through for the past decade, right? So
Yeah, that I feel that. So another question has come is in so this is for Elliston and Bonneville. Do your firms have any desire or capacity to construct and assemble smaller or around 25 unit buildings with a passive house standard envelope utilizing 100% electric VRF ERV heating mechanical systems? So a very specific question, but if either of you want to take a stab at it.
yeah, I could start on this one. I mean, it's a very technical question. For us, what we do with Ellis Don is that we're a development manager that has a high degree of flexibility to work within any supply chain. So I'm not actually tied to my general contractor to execute on projects. I would work with the owner first to see if those technical specifications are appropriate with the project, and that would be my role as a development manager. And in the same way we've done in Newmarket and we're doing it in Edmonton, if Ellis Don's not building the project, I would help the owner secure or procure a general contractor with those parameters there. But of course, as I said, we're agnostic. We run the analysis on all those different types of solutions and present whether it makes sense for the client after going up through all of those parameters. So generally, yes, we would look at any project across Canada.
Thank you.
For us, it would be yes, we can look at it, and also like the smaller building we've built in the last 18 months was 18 units in a 1400 population, small municipalities. The 100% heating, cooling, and mechanical, that's pretty much what we do in Quebec anyway. So it's pretty much all we do. So yes, it is possible to do. The smaller we have done in multi-residential is 18. We do have, a catalog of product for 18, 20, 40, 60 plus, anything above that also. So we're pretty flexible on that. We mostly located in Quebec and Ontario for location purposes. We have offices in Ontario and we have offices in Quebec, but mostly that's where we install.
And so we have another question here, which I might actually expand on this question. The question is, can modules be put to make passive house standard buildings? And I might expand on that a little bit on how flexible is modular design when as it relates to specific energy efficiency targets or programs.
On our side, we're pretty flexible. There are some of the standards that we use in our houses, like our wall to ceiling assembly. We recently passed our UL tests, so we're going to be, I think, one of the first manufacturer in North America to have their tests in the UL catalog. So this is not related to the envelope, but for the rest of the building, we can definitely do it. We have proposed, we've like everyone else probably put some projects within BCH, and we our energy efficient we're looking for is 45% above, the minimum required. We haven't had a chance yet, I think, to look at specifically passive houses modules, but passive principles, but it wouldn't be an issue because it's related to the envelopes. So as long as, and even, if like your UL standard doesn't include the envelope, it's really floor ceiling that we got approved. So yeah, we could look at it. It wouldn't be impossible to look at for sure.
For Nellis Dawn project, we've developed our own, we call it base design, which is a modern method of construction more on the standardized design front, which means that any mid-rise project that we start will start at a 60% design development that we know is CMHC compliant for the AHF programs, ACLP. And with that kind of suite of designs, we have design briefs that we can either go passive house or we can go net zero carbon, which gives us the benefit of being pretty accelerated in terms of this design solution. But if we go passive house, what we would do at that time is probably almost immediately go to construction procurement to see which MMC providers in whichever jurisdiction we're working in would it be able to participate in the construction of that design solution, which is a little bit more advanced. But it would allow for a competitive procurement. But to answer that question directly, a passive house build on the basis of a template we could bring into the project.
Thank you
Can,
so much.
can I jump in quickly, Paige? One thing I was gonna add to is we've worked with quite a few manufacturers that have explored building to passive house design, and then some are doing a lot of R&D internally of how they can do that. I think if you're exploring it though, keep in mind like that will, and maybe Marita, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that will have an impact on the assembly and manufacturing process a little bit. There's some lessons learned for the trades, the general labor in there, and so on. So, um, which may or may not have an impact on cost. I think if you're looking to go passive house modules, I shouldn't speak on behalf of manufacturers, but if it's more than one project or multiple units or multiple mods, then it's likely more beneficial because it's not throwing in, a completely, new design into a already very structured manufacturing process. But we've worked with a lot of manufacturers who are exploring this. A lot of the passive house standard or designs we've seen that's leveraging MMC, they're panels in mostly in Ontario that I've seen in out west right now.
Thank you. I might also just add that there it would be I think a difference in the difficulty if you're designing to Passive House standards versus if you're designing to get Passive House certified, if only for the fact that a lot of the materials in required for Passive House certification have to come from very specific locations, have to come pre-certified. Whereas if you're using Passive House standards, you could theoretically get a window that meets all the same requirements as a Passive House certified window, but you might not need to get a specific one actually certified as Passive House. So there would be a bit of a nuance there where if you're just designing to those standards, emulating the methodology and the thought process that Passive House encourages, it might be a little bit more achievable. So I think those are all the questions that we've received over the chat at this point in time. So we do have about 5 more minutes allocated to the Q&A. So at this point, if there's anybody on the call who would like to ask the question verbally, if that's preferred, I'll invite you to do so. So I'll just wait a second, see if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question. Oh, we do have more coming in. Sorry. Okay. How are modular methods of construction adapted to northern and remote contexts, such as Nunavut, where projects face extreme climate, limited construction seasons, high logistic costs, and unique regulatory and community considerations? In particular, how do you address heavy lift and equipment requirements for assembling larger modules in regions with limited crane availability, and the importance of utilizing a local workforce that may not have a prior modular construction experience? Are these types of communities your organizations are actively targeting and working to provide solutions in?
Well, I can go on that one. We've installed in remote locations in the past. I'll be honest, right now we had to focus a lot of our operations more locally to get volumes. The goals in the last 18 months was to get the actual critical volumes to achieve, some like a portfolio of projects or enough projects in the pipeline to actually be able to drop our price. We've done it in the past. We haven't spent much time lately. But I think it'll come. We would be interested to look at it, but it have to be really well planned because that could be real headaches. And also, it's important that local workforce are used. So what we've been approached by communities or with providers, the equivalent of service managers, and then there was a bit of challenge with the existing workforce there. So it would be possible, but it have to be before we actually start talking prices. I would say there's going to be a lot of criteria, a lot of discussions to be have in terms of how to make it. It is possible. It's been done. We've installed in 12 countries. Okay, so we've installed as far as Japan. So we've done it in the past in different types of modules, but it have to be looked at on a case-to-case basis.
Thank you.
We've delivered projects in the north. It gets obviously extremely complicated. Like shipping to Nunavut primarily relies on seasonal sea lifts for bulk goods and air freight for smaller time-sensitive things. And you only for the sea lifts, you only have basically once every year that you can ship what you need to. Modular is an excellent solution because you can assemble and you can ship the boxes essentially up to north for assembly. What that means for local participation in the construction, obviously, that you're going to have a lot of it done in factories that are on mainland and ship or from international. So it is a bit at odds as in maximizing the local participation of the construction, but it still does an important consideration. A big thing with that is quantity risk. So, there's not a lot of ways to supplement anything that's been miscalculated if it's made it to the Northern Territories. So you really have to make sure that your general contractor and your suppliers are very on the ball with what they're providing in those sea lifts, because there's no, you just don't run the whole depot as you could, in Ontario. For the second part of the question is for cranes and these different things, we call it common elements across different projects. I really like what Build Canada Homes has done in terms of aggregating projects into portfolios, because this means you can take multiple sites that are being developed concurrently where you may need to share a crane on a kind of a master schedule. and different types of things like generators in rural Northern Ontario and all these different types of things that can be procured for the benefit of multiple projects that are built simultaneously. So that's a lot of considerations that we look at as a general contractor to find things that are common across sites, to work that into our master schedule when we're working on multiple sites within a larger geographic response.
Thank you so much. Okay, we are coming to the end of our time, so I think this will be our last question before we turn it over to Maxime and the case study with Util. So we have a question is, are you able to give us a ballpark in costs? For example, an approximate hard cost and soft costs for on a per square foot basis for a mid-rise construction with prefab, mass timber, thinking non-market housing located in Toronto. So that's an example, but just a sense of a per square foot costs.
We don't do 12 to 15 stories, so we're light wood frame. So we're stop to 6, so I wouldn't be able to answer that. Maybe Nicholas, if in your case, maybe you've seen these types of projects, but I don't have data for that.
It's so hard to do because I'm reading the question in real time here, and all of those are such variables. And I mean, I just look at, I knew I was going to get asked this question, and if you go onto the Canadian Home Builders Association, their cost to build is between $300 and $900 per square foot, without reference to the contract delivery model. I could tell you that mass timber is slightly is being delivered on a premium of 3 to 5%. Non-market housing, I mean, there's what drives non-market housing pricing up is probably the programmatic requirements that you see from the different governmental programs. That's really hard to price because those fluctuate, and you can really have a lot of different, according to the owner's requirements. It doesn't necessarily have to turn into a hard or soft cost variable, but it can. So I mean, it's within that ballpark, but I'm simply going by the Canadian Home Builders Association's numbers and not a private sector contractor.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. So at this point in time, thank you to Martin and Nicholas for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming out and sharing some information and knowledge with us. And at this point, I will turn it over to Maxime with Util. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. I understand that I'm in the worst position in Canada, that is being in competition with the Canada-US hockey match. So I'll try to be interesting and brief so we can all move on to watching the game. Just let me share my screen for a second. So yeah, I'm the Director of Public Affairs at Util. I've been working in affordable housing for 4 years now. I am a political scientist by trade, so if you have very specific questions and very technical questions, I may not have all the answers to them, but we've been working with Bonneville, so maybe Martin can help me with the more technical questions. I'm glad to see you here. So the presentation plan for today, I'm going to very briefly present who Util is, what we do, and then I'm going to present the case study of the modular project that we did in Rimouski that was delivered in September 2025. And then I have some recommendations on how we can collectively unlock the potential of manufacturing processes in housing. This is going to be a bit of a more macro presentation in the sense that what we've tried to do is use the Rimouski project to do some research and development on modular construction, and we drew some conclusions on what we need to do as an industry to drive the cost of modular construction down. So I'll be presenting all of that, and then we'll have some time for a question at the end. So about Util, briefly, we are a social economy enterprise. We specialize in developing and operating nonprofit student housing across Quebec. Our goal is to develop 600 to 800 units annually, and we started last year successfully. So now we are operating in 6 cities now. These are the most important universities in Quebec. We currently have 5 buildings that are being rented. Roughly 750 units, 900 students live in our buildings today. And we have, as I said, 800 units that are under construction at the moment, including 500 that we are delivering this year. So we're almost doubling the size of our park in 2026. So it's exciting times for us. So to get into the main element, it says since we started doing student housing, everybody's been telling us, oh, you should do modular construction since you do student housing. I'm not sure where that comes from. I think people saw the containers student residence in Denmark or the Netherlands, and then they thought we should do this as well. And it never appeared to be a good option for us. And people kept telling us the most amazing things about modular construction. We were told that modular construction is 50% faster than traditional construction. It's better quality because it's in a controlled environment. It's cheaper than traditional construction, and it's also greener than traditional construction. And we said, wow, this is amazing. It's also utterly impossible. So why is everyone telling us that modular construction is, this unicorn that does everything better than traditional construction? And if it is so incredible, why does it only have like 4 to 5% of market shares? That seems to be unrealistic. So at one point came an opportunity in the form of CMHC's Housing Supply Challenge, round 5, scaling up. And so we applied to this program and we got funding from CMHC. And the idea was, okay, student housing is potentially a good fit for modular construction because it's small apartments, it's highly standardized, it's high volume. So it probably makes sense to use modular construction for student housing. So if we get funding from CMHC, we can devote time and energy to truly understand why is it that the promises of modular construction are not necessarily met in reality. So we went around, talked to a lot of actors in the industry, and we started with a first diagnosis, which was that modular construction is not scaling up because there's a lack of expertise in the industry, and also there are no recurring clients. And what often happened, we found out, was that because funding was incentivizing modular construction, the owner of a project would change from traditional methods to modern methods of construction. And
I think, unfortunately, we've
Did we
lost
lose
Maxim for a
Maxim?
second, but hopefully we can get him back in just a moment.
am I back?
Yes, you're back
Yes,
now.
you are.
Yeah.
Okay, but and I'm still sharing. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Paige, for letting me know that I was speaking to myself. Um, I'm unsure where you lost me, though. Was the last thing I said?
Just that you had that your diagnosis was that the construction isn't scaling up because of lack of expertise. We only
Yeah.
lost you for about 20 seconds.
Okay, so what usually happens is that the owner of a project would have funding from the Rapid Housing Initiative, and then they would change their plans from traditional methods of construction to MMC, and then it wouldn't work optimally because that's not the best way to do modular construction. And so they said, well, it wasn't really successful. It wasn't very effective. So we'll just go back to traditional methods of construction. And all the learning that happened in that project was lost. And so we said, okay, we are the developers. We hire the general contractors, the architects, the engineers, the manufacturers. As the developers, we can be the recurring client and we can commit to develop multiple projects and try to incentivize at least some actors of the industry to develop their knowledge. And so we created sort of a consortium, which was made of a manufacturer, a general contractor, architects, and engineer to work on the Rimouski project. And we work with these people from the get-go with modular methods of construction. And so that gave us the Rimouski project, which is a 155 units built in, so volumetric modules to use, a category 1B or 1C to use the language that was previously used today. It's 155 units across 4 stories. It houses about 185 students. It's mostly studios, but we also have 2-bedroom apartments. It was built with 96 modules in the Bonneville Industrie near Montreal, and 62 of these modules were identical. So it was exactly the same module that was being built over and over again, which is very important if you want to have efficiency gains from standardization. The total project cost was about $30.5 million. And capital stack, we got a subsidy from the Quebec-Canada agreement and a senior mortgage loan from a social housing investment fund. And we got free land from the municipality, which helped a lot. So in terms of timeline, that's a big advantage of modular construction. And yes, it was extremely quick. In May 2024, the City Council of Rimouski officialized the transfer of a parcel of land to us. And then we started construction in October, mid-October 2024. We started on-site and off-site essentially at the same time. And then 10 months later, in August 2025, the tenants moved in. So that's a 15 months timeline from the moment we got the land to the moment the tenants moved in, and about 10 months from when we broke ground on site to when the tenants moved in. It's particularly important for us because we do student housing. We cannot start renting in the middle of a semester. And so being able to go this fast, it basically allowed us to open a full school year faster than if we had used traditional construction. So that's a huge win for us. And the occupancy rate in Rimouski at the time was 99.8%. And students were forced to cancel their study plans at the university there because they just couldn't find any housing. It wasn't even about affordability, it was just simply about availability. And so there was a very urgent need to have affordable student housing being built there. We did some research and development efforts. We had sort of an open book policy with our business partners because we wanted to be able to identify exactly what were the costs of the project. And we paid a consulting firm, MMP, to measure precisely the cost of everything that went into building this project. And this is, I think, the most important contribution of Utsil to the sort of effort to understand modular construction. So we had basically an accountant on site calculating the costs of materials, the costs of labor for every budget line in the project. And we also asked the general contractor to have a full-time staff on deck and just writing down what were the challenges of using MMC and what were the solutions that were used to overcome those. So the overall, how did it go? Well, as I said, construction time was 50% faster than if we had used traditional methods of construction. We had some important gains from standardization. So the productivity of the factory was increased by about 30% due to the fact that instead of changing the production line every 2 modules to produce something different, they could have an optimized production line to produce, say, our 62 identical modules. And that led to a reduction in labor cost from the standardization of about 30%. So these are all gains that we made using MMC, but still overall, the cost of the project were not cheaper than traditional construction, which of course begs the question, why? So if it's faster, if we have productivity gains, why is it not cheaper than traditional construction? And one important thing that we noticed when doing the breakdown of the cost was that in the end, about 43% of the cost of the project were incurred in the factory, and 57% of the cost of the project were still on site. So even though we used volumetric modular construction, it's actually more of a hybrid project where we're still highly dependent on on-site construction methods to assemble the building. So the most important aspect to understand why modular construction wasn't cheaper than traditional construction in that project is what you have in front of you right now. So in terms of direct costs, so these are the good news. When we measured how much it cost for mechanical systems, electrical work, interior finishes, doors and windows, we had reduction when compared to a traditional alternative of 9% to 24% of the cost. So doing interior finishes in the factory was indeed more productive and cheaper than doing it on site. Overall, that represented a 7% reduction in direct costs compared with the traditional methods of construction. However, we also had to account for packaging the modules, shipping the modules, and assembling the modules on site, which are expenses that you don't have when you use traditional methods of construction, and basically essentially canceled each other out. So we saved on some of the costs by using manufacturing processes, but those savings were canceled out by the costs of packaging and assembling the modules. And then on top of that, you have to add the indirect costs of the manufacturer. So this is the costs that the manufacturer incurs for having a plant and staff to administrate the plan and to pay taxes. So the general contractors have those indirect costs, but of course, general contractors, I like to joke that it's four people in a tent. They have relatively low indirect costs, whereas with manufacturer as well, it's a manufacturer, so you have high indirect costs. And so about 20% of the costs of our modules were actually the indirect cost of running the plant. And that is extremely important because what that means is that your project that is using volumetric construction, the cost of it is directly related to the volume of production annually of your manufacturer. Because the higher the volume of production of your manufacturer, the lower the portion of the indirect costs that your project has to bear. And so as we increase productivity in manufacturing plants, we can expect those indirect costs to go down, and that should allow us to move closer to parity between volumetric construction and traditional methods of construction. So, oh, thank you, Brandon. Some of the conclusions that we drew from this, it's important that we understand that it's not just a different method of construction, it's an entirely different business model. As I said, unlike general contractors, the manufacturers have very high capital investment and they have very high fixed cost. And manufacturers cannot be mobilized and demobilized easily. So if for any reason your project in traditional construction is behind schedule, then you can call a general contractor and say, we're going to start production 3 months later. You cannot do that with a modular manufacturer. They have a production line, and if you cancel your project, then the manufacturing line will not be working at that time, and 3 months later it might be busy with another client. So they cannot be mobilized and demobilized that easily. And when you have an industry, this doesn't apply only to housing, but when you have an industry with very high levels of capital investment, they can either have two strategies. They can either have high volume with low margins, which is what we want because low margins means cheaper products, so lower construction cost, or they could have lower volumes with high margins. And traditionally, this is what the Canadian manufacturing industry has been doing, right? They would do high-end, highly personalized, high quality product. And so that would make sense from their business model perspective, but this is not what we need to build 1.3 million affordable housing in Canada. So if we want to really use modern methods of construction, we need to sort of make that switch from a low volume with high margins business model to a high volume with low margins business model. So how do we bring costs down? Well, first, direct costs. So as I said, we had about 7% reduction in direct costs from using manufacturing processes. We could increase that 7% to 10, 12, 15. How do we do that? Well, we can have investment in robotization and the efficiency of the plant. That comes with a warning because when we've looked at international examples, we saw that in a lot of places where there had been massive investments in factories without the guarantee that demand will follow, they tended to go bankrupt. So this may be not a message for the people in the room, but when we meet with BCH, we tell them it's great your plan to invest in modular construction, but make sure that demand follows any capital investment to increase productivity. We could increase the proportion of the work that is being done in the factory. So as I said earlier, our split was about 43% in factory, 57% on site. When we look at Sweden, they have a plant that does about 52% of the work. So as we move more portion of the work in the factory where the processes are optimized, we can drive costs down. And standardization is better with higher volume. So if you're doing 18 units, then maybe you have, I don't know, 7 or 8 modules that are identical. So by the time that the production chain is optimized for these modules, they have to change it again. Whereas if you do 155 units, well, then the manufacturer will produce the same modules over and over again, and then they get more time to optimize the production chain and squeeze out as many economies of scale as possible. In terms of indirect costs, well, I said most of it already. So the indirect cost is divided among all the projects that are being built in the factory in any given year. And so as we increase productivity and volume of projects, it drives the costs down. However, our experience as a developer who wanted to commit to be a good customer and provide a predictable stream of orders, what we found out is that the lack of predictable funding makes it impossible for us to provide that predictability to the manufacturer. And so if we truly want to have a productive industry that produces at scale, we absolutely need to change the way public funding works for affordable housing. And I know that in the affordable housing sector, we've been asking for predictability for basically forever, but this is different. So the lack of predictable funding for traditional projects, it's inefficient, but for modular construction, it's a deal breaker. And so we're really trying to drive that point across that if we're serious about scaling up modular construction, then we need to start with having predictable long-term funding so that we, the owners, can give predictability to the manufacturers in terms of how many orders they're going to have so that they can increase their annual output, so that they can reduce the indirect costs for all of those projects. And finally, this has been discussed earlier. We also have to do something about financing costs. As has been said, basically no lenders will currently want to finance the deposit and the upfront costs that are associated with modular construction. What ends up happening a lot of the time is that the manufacturers themselves will borrow the money at a high rate, and they have no choice but to pass that cost down to the owner, and that ends up increasing the costs of the projects overall. So what we are working on at UTSIL is a sort of movable mortgage that would allow us to guarantee the loan for the deposit. And so the lenders will consider that this is not too risky anymore, and they would accept to finance this project at a lower cost than what is being currently incurred by the owners. And so if we do all of this, we are confident that we can have the costs of modular construction being closer and closer to the cost of traditional construction. And when this happens, we can build twice as fast for a similar cost, and that will be incredible, but we are just not there yet. And so that would conclude my presentation. I want to say that we are working on a white paper that will sort of extend on what I've presented today, and it will be available publicly in French and English at some time in the future. And if you want to have a look at it, just follow us on LinkedIn and we'll make sure to tell everyone when it's out because we had public funding to do this research. So we are highly motivated to spread the news about what we found out. And that's it.
Thank you so much for all of that. I know that found that so interesting and so enlightening, and I definitely will be making sure to watch out for that white paper. At this point in time, I know we're closing in on the end of our time with us, so we have a couple of questions popping up that I'll probably Maxim, if you don't mind spending another minute or two with us, we might address. Really quickly before we answer questions, though, Brandon, can you just share with everybody in case they have to leave what we're talking about next week?
I can. I won't show the slide, but it's right in front of me. So next week is topic is design with intention, integrating MMC into site and program planning. So site planning requirements, CSAA 277 certification and code compliance, indigenous-led housing approaches, and supportive housing design considerations. So looking forward to that.
Right. So for anybody who does have to hop off, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see you at the same time next week on Tuesday. If this is being recorded and a CHRA is working on a way to make sure that this gets to everybody if you do need to hop off. In the meantime, Maxim, there is a question coming in. Can you speak to the experience of the students living in UTIL's Rimouski project? For example, did the modular build result in fewer deficiency being reported after move-in? Was there a noise reduction promises of modular build met? And any other operational commentary?
Overall, we don't see a big difference between modular and traditional construction in terms of deficiencies reported. There were a few mistakes that we did that were based on our inexperience with the technology, and we're confident that there will be fewer of these types of mistakes the next time that we do a modular project. But overall, the what our impression with the using modular construction is that the end product is very similar to what we would have if we had used traditional methods of construction. It's a little bit too early to speak confidently about the experience of students. We do have a satisfaction survey that we do at the end of every school year. So in about a year's time, we can compare the answers of our students living in this building to those who lived in buildings that were built using traditional methods, and we can have a better idea of if it makes much of a difference for the people living in the building.
Amazing. I think those were the questions. Oh, and so yeah, I think those were all the questions. If I missed your question, apologies. Please just make sure to reach out to us again, and we'll try to get any questions that we did miss today added to a Q&A that we or frequently asked questions list that we'll share afterwards. But in the meantime, again, thank you all very much for your time, and we will see you next week.